getting started carving this rosette, and you can see that I started with the thick outline border there. And the reason I started with that was so that I could do that as one continuous chip rather than trying to, if I had done these inside parts first that meet up with it, then I would have to try to adjust these individual chips, or rather the line, to accommodate what I did with those individual chips. And that would be tricky to make it smooth and a nice circle if I did that. So by doing it this way, starting with that, if there's any adjustments I need to make due to irregularities in carving that, then it's easier to do on just one of these individual small chips that doesn't really connect all the way around like the circle does. So that's one pattern I always use when doing something like this, when a series of smaller chips meets up with a single more encompassing chip. This one gave me a little bit of trouble as I carved this first cut. It's actually not quite with the grain. It's a little bit off, and I should have been carving it this way, but by coming this way, the grain kind of messed up the knife point a little bit, got me off where I wanted, and caused a little bit of an asymmetry there that I gotta try to clean up a little bit. The nice thing about these little diamond shapes is that they're not right next to each other, so any differences in their size or shape, as long as they're pretty minor, are kind of hidden. You don't really notice too much any small differences. Whereas things like the inside here, where everything's connected and back to back, it's going to be more apparent if one of them's bigger than the others or whatever. A little bit of misalignment. So now this is the same chip that gave me issues on the other side. So be a little bit more careful here and pay attention to that grain direction. That one turned out much better. A bit more of that black pattern line to cut away. Well, that's one of the advantages to doing the same type of chip all around rather than kind of sticking through one area and doing this part and then coming in and moving around the circle by doing the same chip all the way around. I can kind of learn from one to the next and make sure that I make any adjustments based on previous results. Whereas if I'd been just kind of sticking with one area and going around, I probably would have forgotten that by the time I got to another chip. So, same thing, I'll come around and do this same type of chip all the way around. So now here on this type of chip where I'm coming back into where I already cut, but there's a deeper point here. I want to try to get that knife point down in there, but I want to make sure I don't pull the blade too far back, because then it'll come up against the surface that I already cut away and create a line that I don't want there. So gotta make sure to get the point down in there, but leave the blade off of the carved surface. This is going to be something to be aware of as I make this transition. The tightest spot of the curve is actually where the grain direction transitions to, so I'm actually going to cut this away a little bit as a kind of a relief chip to give me some wiggle room so that the wood can kind of move a little bit rather than just ripping out, because otherwise it's going to tend to want to rip out and run along the grain there. So we'll see if we can avoid that. Right here, a little bit of run ahead, see what it looks like when I'm done. Yeah, I don't know if you can see that in the camera, but a little bit of the grain kind of just didn't get cut, it actually ripped and losing a little bit there. So I'll actually keep that in place and I'll glue that in so I'm not just missing a chunk of wood. Deal with that later. But there's often little things like that that kind of go wrong, not quite perfect what we're looking for. But some ways to mitigate it, otherwise you gotta kind of figure out how to fix it. As I make that cut and think about following the line, I remembered that I actually missed the line and intended to come back and trim that extra little bit off on this one, so I'll do that while I'm thinking about it. This shape is reminiscent of a Gothic leaf shape, where this would typically want to be a point. You'd have kind of a square in the middle with the teardrop coming around the sides. But for this particular pattern, I actually don't want that to be a ridge on the inside of that curve. So I'm taking care to make sure that if I do create a ridge, I smooth it out to make it a more rounded shape. So here again is that same one that ripped out on me before. I think to solve it this time I'm going to make two cuts, one coming around each side, so I'm not trying to make that turn. So I'll carve it out this direction first, and come back and do this way.